So, hello everyone. So this is I'm Sanket, and I'll go over the custom template creation of MetroAE, and as well as the new upcoming 4.4 features in MetroAE. So this is the agenda for today. So we'll have a brief introduction, followed by the new features in upcoming Metro 4.4. And after that, Ishwar will talk about adding custom templates to MetroAE config, and there will be Q&A at the end. So let's start with the introduction first. So this talk is primarily about Metro config, but if you're looking for Metro content, these are the places that you can go. And here's the information to GitHub repo and website. And there's the email ID where you can email us, and the link to the YouTube tutorial as well, where this video will be uploaded to. So what is MetroAE config? So config is for Vsd configuration. So a variety of Vsd configurations can be achieved through MetroAE config. We provide 80 plus templates for configuring a variety of things like enterprise, zones, subnets, domains, vports, and many more. So just like Metro, it takes input in two forms, either a YAML file or Excel spreadsheet, and it's available through the Metro container. So when you select the config option or both option. So switching gears, let's talk about the upcoming 4.4 release for Metro and the content that's going to be there. So for the NUH, we have added support for stats out now. So the stats out configuration can be configured, and as well as for the NUH external interfaces. Previously, all of those external interfaces were on a single KVM bridge. Now they are on multiple bridges, and for the NSGV bootstrapping, we support NSGV bootstrapping using the NUH external interfaces now. So that support went in this release. And for the NSGVs, now you can specify variable CPU cores, just like for some other components. We had this support previously, and also for NSGVs, now you can bootstrap NSGVs on AWS using Metro, and all the VSP components can be outside of AWS. It just needs connectivity to the AWS machine. For the VSC, we added option to provide next hop for the VPRN config. And for the VSC configuration, there is an option to apply a user specified config as well, rather than the Metro created config. So that option went in. So for the SD-WAN portal, we support the latest portal version, that is 2011. And we also support installing it without any Elasticsearch present. So previously, Elasticsearch FQDN was required for the portal to install. So we made some more enhancements to our VSR support. We now support the latest VSR install through Metro. And for the VSR licensing, previously a license file needed to be provided. Now you can specify a FTP server location where your license is present. So you don't need to provide a license file for each VSR. Here are some other enhancements. The vSyn upgrades are now supported. vSyn is vCenter integration node. So those upgrades are now supported through Metro for all major, minor, and patch versions for the standalone vSyn. We made some security enhancements for the VSD security hardening. So now we monitor the services shutdown uh, and startup. So that enhancement is in. We also added a phone home capability. This is optional and this is only for internal user. So what this does is it tracks playbook usage only if the users have opted in and they are internal to Nokia. So you can turn it off and on whenever you install the newer version. Uh, we also added support for Metro plugins, so you can bring in your own playbooks and roles which are outside of Metro, which are not a part of Metro, and you can plug them in into Metro. YouTube video for the same is also available on our YouTube channel. With that, I'll pause for some questions, and if not, then Ishwar will take over the presentation.
I guess just one observation, and that is that the version 4.4 will be available later this week. So it's coming out very soon.
Okay, now Ishwar can take over.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ishwar. I'm going to actually be talking about custom templates and stuff. Let me start by sharing my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So custom templates, right? So we actually, as Sanket was already talking about in the earlier slides, we have about 80 different VSD specification templates that we currently ship with our standard stuff. But in some cases, you might actually require to write a custom template, which is not part of the existing standard templates. Most of the standard templates actually cover day zero VNF configs most of the time. If there is any customization that you require, then you have to write a custom template that suits your use case and needs. So what is it? What is a template, right? So the configuration template
sorry to interrupt, Ishwar, but I have a question. So in normal operation, when I'm doing MetroAE config, do I need to worry about the contents of the templates, or is this just something for when I need something special?
So when you're actually working with configuration, you don't have to worry about templates if you're actually using the functionality that's already present. If you're trying to actually do something that is not standard or not part of the templates that we define, then you have to write your own custom templates. So this is actually opening up the covers on what we do when we write templates and what kind of information that we look for in the templates and what information is required for the template to contain so that the engine can actually properly process the template and apply config to the VSD.
Great, thanks.
So the template is nothing. It's just a simple YAML file with Jinja2 variable substitutions in there to go about figuring out how to apply the configuration or what the lineage of the system is, right? So there are multiple sections to the template. The name section is the name of the template. It should be the name that you define when you define your user data. Description is the description of the template, and then the usage restrictions are documents that you can, so based on the usage that you write there or the restrictions that you say, hey, this is only for a revert, this is for create, and this when you create this, you are going to require all these previous objects to be present. It's used mostly for document generation. So we have MD files that get generated as part of templates, so you can view them up. And then the template version, which is actually the version of the template that you're trying to do. And the engine version is the MetroAE config engine version that this template supports. And then the software type is, so when we actually design the configuration engine, we actually envision that we're going to actually use it for multiple components. So that's why the software type actually is here. So if for most of the stuff times, we actually work with the VSD, so your software version is going to be the VSD. And software version is the version of the VSD that you're going to target against. So a specific feature is just available for 20.10. So you have to specify the software version to be 20.10 so that the template doesn't get applied when you do config for 603. The two sections that are very important in a template are the variables and actions. Variable defines the type of the user data that you're trying to enter, and it is what the user actually enters in. So for example, in the section here, you see I have variables defined for enterprise name, domain template name, and enterprise name. So the enterprise name is what the user actually selects to actually select, hey, this is the domain that I want to get created underneath or select underneath it. So the actions section is the next section that is important because it talks about how or what the behavior of the template is. So based on the actions, it actually does a tree underneath in the code to actually figure out how to build or how to go about creating this object and what are its values that it needs to set. So the actions that are currently supported in the template are select object, create, store value, retrieve value, set values, and save to file. So as you can figure it out, select object means you're trying to select a certain type of object. An object can be selected by a field. So in most of the cases, when you're trying to reference VSD objects, there is a name field, right? So you can use the name of the object. In some cases, for example, a VLAN, there is no name for it. So in that case, you have to change the name field to an ID. You have to say VLAN ID. So your by field here will be changed to VLAN ID, for example, and then you pass the value for a VLAN ID. So that's what the select does. And the create is create actually is used to create an object. So you can actually go and say, hey, create me an enterprise, and then you pass in the type as an enterprise, and then you pass the variables or the parameters for the enterprise. The store and retrieve are actually important as well because when we talk about VSDs, we actually reference IDs in them, right? So you can link up, you can create a link between objects. For example, when you're talking about domain template and domain, because they live in different areas of the system, you cannot directly link them, right? So you have to actually say, hey, select a domain template and store its ID and a variable. And then when you actually are creating a domain, you can say, retrieve this ID and set it. So as you can see here, we are doing a store. I'll go more about the retrieve when I'm actually doing a demo. And set values is kind of important. It actually goes with the create. So set values is a child of the create action, right? So set values is used when you're trying to set a variable to a particular value. So save to file is kind of a unique action type. So this was added to do NSGV bootstrap information. So when you're trying to actually download a ZFP ISO or something like that, you have to use save to file, and then that takes in a bunch of parameters to say what type of file this is going to be. Is it an ISO YAML or something like that? And then you can write that particular output to the file. So when we're talking about creating custom templates, one of the important things that we have to take into consideration is the Vsd API specifications. These are specs that are provided by engineering. So they're all published in GitHub. What this contains is it contains the object model for the Vsd config. So it contains all your objects that you're allowed to create on the VSD and what parameters are supported. Are there optional values? Are there mandatory values? If it's an enumeration type, what are the enum values going to be? And what are the enum values that are valid in there and things like that. So when you're doing this, you want to actually make sure that you know what the specifications look like. And the specifications are nothing but a JSON object, so they're all very easily readable. You can actually open them up and look at it. I will show a sample specification when I'm doing the demo so that you can get a handle on it. And this is this GitHub URL is where you can go and actually download the specifications. Specifications are different for different releases, so they actually have tags and branches in there that you can leverage to get the correct specifications that you want for a particular VSD version.
So I have a similar question to what I asked you before, and that is, to be clear, are these specifications required? Do I have to look at them when I'm just using MetroAE Config out of the box? Or is
No,
this
out of the box, you're not worried about specifications, but if you're trying to write your custom templates, only you're worried about specifications.
Okay, thanks.
Because most of the times, because we actually have written the standard templates that have all the feature specs, so you don't have to worry about it. You just have to provide user data if you're not going to be using customizations. If you're doing custom templates, you have to understand what the specifications look like.
And do I have to double check what's the target like Vsd version? So for example, if I download and install the latest MetroAE, and let's say the target Vsd is maybe version 5, maybe version 6, maybe version 20, the latest, right? So do I have to verify this or should be relaxed on that front?
So if you're using the standard templates, we already version the standard templates to a minimum version of the VSD that it can support. So for example, if you're looking at enterprise, it starts at version 5 and it goes up to the current version of the VSD. When we are talking about standard templates, we maintain the standard templates. So if there are any changes to specifications or object model, we create new templates based on versions. So the system will actually handle the versioning for you. So if you're doing custom templates, you want to make sure that the specifications that you are looking at are supported by the VSD as well. So if a particular feature is for 20.10, you want to make sure your specifications you're looking at as 20.10. Okay. Does that answer the question?
Okay, but how can we figure out what is covered by the templates? So which objects we can update and what kind of operations we can do.
So the standard templates, I can actually show you the list of standard templates that currently ship with MetroAE Config. So we actually have about 80 templates that cover a different set of functionality, right? So we have, so there's this examples as well that we actually tar up and then put it in the MetroAE config that contains, or it is actually based on groups as well. So I'll give you a demo of that as well on what kind of groups that we have and then what the user data looks like as well in there so that you can get a clear picture.
Right. Okay. Okay. If we have some fields readable, some fields are writable. Does it mean that we can manipulate all fields? For example, we are creating enterprise, and we can specify the profiles, the QoS available. I don't know, if we're able to do IPsec, doesn't matter either. Okay. If the object is covered by the templates, let's say, as mentioned by Tadas, it's let's imagine this is 20. And we have some object, G, for example, doesn't matter. We have some fields. Can we say that we can make all possible reads and writes and for this object? I think I mean that if he need to update some of the fields or read some status, read some API keys, so parameters of the objects. So does it mean that we can perform all possible operations which are specified by API?
Yes. So as long as so you can actually perform anything that's part of the VSD specifications, right? So any attribute that's been defined by the VSD specification can be set using templates. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you.
So I think there's an example, and I think maybe you're going to talk about this, Ishwar, but one of the recent things that happened was that one of the users of MetroAE Config wanted to create an enterprise, and the enterprise template that we ship happens to not expose the parameter or set of parameters that he wanted to change. And so what we did was we helped him to customize his template. So he took the existing enterprise template and extended it to allow it to set those values that we did cover.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about a couple of examples here that we encountered from field where, the way our standard templates have been written are, so if you're trying to create a domain object, right, like an L3 domain, we create the domain template and we create the domain as well as part of the template. But we have actually had recommends, or we have actually had people ask us to say, I don't want to create the domain template, but I want to leverage the existing one. So we actually help them create a custom template and change values in there. And there's this another use case where the NSG network port for an uplink connection, we actually have it defaulted to dynamic, but there was a user who wanted to change it to different modes, right? Like static or PPOE and things like that. So I'm going to actually show you how to do that and work or give a demo on what the specification looks like, and we can look at it as well. Okay.
This is possible to in-house, I mean, customize these templates and do a necessary adjustments, right? So maybe contribute by that templates to the Metro later on. Is it the way we would like to build
yes, that's exactly the way we want you guys to contribute back to the templates. Okay. So we want you to actually build the custom templates and contribute back to us, and then we're going to make sure that they're part of the standard templates. We're going to do testing on them to make sure we keep updating them after that.
Okay, so if I would imagine we have, let's say I would be doing this in the field and try to deploy this. Then I've customized the template. Everything works fine. So I see that I have everything nicely deployed or managed by that template. Mm-hmm. So what is the way? Do we have separate report for that templates? And I have to submit a commit. So you will be reviewing this commit, or that templates are just a part of the overall Metro repository?
So for any contributions that we get back, so there's a separate repo that we maintain for the standard template. So if you actually build your own custom template, we would want you to submit a pull request to that template, to that Git repo, so that we can review and make sure that it's actually following the existing norms that are defined for a template. And if everything is correct, then, if it's going to be used by more people, then we're going to merge that back into the standard templates.
Okay, so engineers in the field able to contribute, able to do commits, and you have to review your merging this with the repo. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so I think part of the model that we have in mind is that we would have a set of what we'll call certified templates. These are templates that we promise work correctly, that we run automated tests on, we version them according to the Nuage Vsd versions as they come out. And then in addition to that, we would like to have a repository for community templates. These are templates that people say, hey, I created this template. It does this really cool thing. I put a loop in it. I can do 1,000 subnets, and with just one template, I can do 1,000 subnets, and it automatically increments the subnet names and blah, 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 right? So put some fancy features. Something like that we might not want to turn into a certified template, but we would like to make it available. So our goal as we go forward is to have 2 sets of templates. A place where we keep certified templates that everyone uses and that we promise work well, and another place where community people can upload their templates and share and have discussions about them. We don't have that location currently set up, but it's part of our plan going forward.
Okay, so but we supposed to have some quality review of this submitted templates. Am I correct?
Certainly the ones for the certified part. But if we run it like an open source project, we would have community review of everything that comes in.
Just trying to understand if it's something like a Galaxy.
It is just like I have in mind something like Galaxy, yes. That's
Okay.
For those of you who don't know, Galaxy is an Ansible repository for roles, and if I create something with Ansible that I think is really cool, I can share it with everybody in the world by uploading it to Galaxy.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So the next section that I want to talk about is a template helper, right? From the previous section, you might actually be looking at all the different things that we have to do to define a template, and it can actually be very overwhelming for people that, looking at it and say, oh my God, there are multiple sections that I have to worry about, and how do I make sure that I'm actually following the norms or creating the template correctly so that I don't have issues with it. So we designed a utility tool that gets shipped with MetroAE Config as well, which is called a template helper. What the template helper does is it actually creates a bare bone structure of the template. So it actually reads the specification. It takes all the attributes that are supported by a particular config object and actually creates a template for you that you can start and keep editing it based on your requirements. So what does it take, right? So it takes a template helper YAML file. So that a YAML file that contains a name, a description of the template that you're trying to create, and the VSD version that you're going to create it against. And then you define the lineage of that config object. Where does it live? Does it live under the enterprise? Okay, so if it lives under the enterprise, then you're going to start off by root as the enterprise. So you're going to say select as root enterprise. And then you're going to say select a domain template for it. And then you're going to store the domain template ID. And then the next section, you're going to say select enterprise, create a domain object, and say retrieve the domain template ID here. So what this helper says here is select an enterprise, select the domain template, save its ID, select the enterprise, create a domain object with all the attributes, and then when it comes to the portion of setting a template ID in that, it just takes the value from that store and then sets it. So I'm going to actually do a demo of it and show you how it works. So the way you can run a template helper is template helper and the name of the helper file that we just created and the VSD specification path that you're referencing. So time for demo. So, okay. So I actually have a template helper py file. This is the Python file that creates the templates for you. So this is the helper example that I was actually showing in the slides. What this does is it says I'm creating a domain object, and this is description that you're going to be putting part of the template and the minimum VSD version supported, and this is my structure. This is my lineage. So I'm saying select the root object, which is enterprise, domain template ID, and store it. And then I'm going to actually do the same thing, create the domain object and the domain template ID. So if I go ahead and actually run template helper with the helper example and the specification path that I have, and then I'm actually going to dump it to a test.yaml file. So when I run this, it's completed now. So if I go back to my IDE and open the test.yaml, it creates a template for you with the information that you have given it. So what it does is it says, hey, I'm creating a domain template name, the description, usage, and these restrictions and usage are something that you're going to fill in if you're looking to generate documentation from it. And then it's going to set the software version and the engine version to the current engine version that you're going to run against, and the template version as well. So as you can see, when we created the helper example, all we just said is select a object with enterprise. The template actually already goes ahead and says, oh, I'm going to actually create an enterprise name and call it a type reference here, which means that this is actually something that we're going to use as part of the select. And the domain template name is the domain template that you're going to select it against. And then all these attributes that you see here, the BGP, DHCP, DHCP server address, DPI, all that other stuff that you see are directly pulled in from the domain specification and added as part of the template for you. So it actually goes ahead and creates a choice if it's actually something like it's an enumeration for enabling, disabling, or things like that. So for PBR based or route based, depending on what your functionality you want to do with the template, you can go ahead and remove these attributes that you don't need. So these are all the attributes that are directly dumped from the specification. And when it gets to the part of the actions portion, it does everything for you. So it says, hey, select a root object, which is enterprise by name, and the variable value is the enterprise name. And then it goes ahead and says, I'm going to select an object of domain template by name with the domain template name that you have provided to me as part of variables. And then I'm going to store its value. And then when it comes to the portion of creating the domain, so it says create object, and the actions on the create object is set values. That means that I'm going to set all the attributes that you have defined here on the domain when you get created on the VSD, and it actually dumps everything out in there. So these values that are already surrounded by an if block are optional values. If it's not required, then we are going to do it as an if. So if you actually have something where you want the template to actually have a default value, because even if it's an option, you want to say something other than what the default of the VSD supports, then you're going to simply remove the if block and do a Jinja filter for default. And then say enabled, for example. So what this does is, irrespective of the template being provided a value, if no one provided a BGP enabled value, it's directly going to default to enabled. If someone provides it, then it's going to use that. Okay, and then as you can see at the very bottom, this is the retrieve value portion of it. So what it does is it stores the domain template ID from the domain template above in the above scenario and sets it to the field template ID in the domain object. Okay, so this is how we create a template from scratch using the template helper, and then you can go about doing things. So in this case, you don't have to worry about the VSD specifications because the template helper takes care of that and figures out all the values that you need in here. But in case you want to actually modify an existing template, so for example, if you want to modify the domain template that we already have. So I already have an L3 domain. I just want to modify this. So the first thing that you're going to have to do is you're going to make a copy of the L3 domain and create your own version of it. Because if you're trying to modify standard templates, whenever templates get upgraded or whenever you upgrade the MetroAE container, the templates get overwritten. So you want to make sure that you have your own set of copies for these, because we don't touch anything that's not part of our own repo or not part of our code. So you're going to create a copy of this, and then what you're going to have to do is you're going to actually have to look at domain.spec. So this domain spec is the VSD specifications that I was talking about. So you can go ahead and look at its values and stuff like that. For example, I'm going to actually add DHCP behavior as my variable, right? So I'm going to actually sorry, I have already something. So so stretched is a very parameter that is part of get an attribute, says name stretched, and then put a description and type of Boolean or something based on what it says, right? So if you're looking for the type is actually part of the specification. It says it's a Boolean type, so we actually use the same thing. So we say Boolean and it's optional true, and when it comes to the portion of creating the domain, we actually just set this value, something like this. Because it's an optional, then you can actually surround it by a Jinja2 if block. That's right. And say stretched is defined, and then you can actually surround it this way to actually represent that it's actually an optional value that doesn't need to be provided by the template. So this is how you modify existing templates and look at specifications and things like that. Another example that I want to provide is directly.
Wait, I've got a question. So when you were modifying that template, you made a copy of the template, and then you started modifying it. And I think that the minimum is that you have to add it to the variables section and then add it to the set values.
Correct. If you're trying to add a variable, yes.
Okay. All right.
The minimum is actually adding it here, because if you don't add it in the variables, then the template wouldn't know what to do with it, because it doesn't understand. Anything that's not part of the variables are ignored. And then you have to actually put it in here to be able to set it on the object as well. So variables and actions are very important sections when you're dealing with templates.
All right, cool. Thanks.
The other example that I want to provide is for the uplink connection, right? So as I was talking about in the previous sections, so when we ship our standard templates, we have the uplink connection set to dynamic here. So this is what it was actually set to something like this. But a user said, hey, I'm not going to be tied in with the dynamic. I want to be able to change the mode based on the user input data. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to set a variable, create a variable which says mode, and then when you look at the uplink connection spec, these are all the type of options that are supported by an uplink connection for the mode variable that you're defining. So you can actually go ahead and change the template to say mode, because type is actually of an enumeration because you have different options. Then you can go ahead and define the choices that you want the template to support, right? Even though the uplink connection supports more than the NE or PPOE, I just have it hard-coded, or I just have it set, oh, this specification for this template, I don't need all those other values. I just need these two choices. That's all those two choices that are going to be set on the system. So what I'm going to do is when I'm going to actually go ahead and say, when I create the uplink connection, I'm going to actually go ahead and say, change it to variable for mode. One thing that needs to be remembered as part of the template creations is templates are actually going to do what the user defines in here. It doesn't have to say, oh, I can actually have only one create object. No, that's not true. You can create any number of actions underneath. You can go ahead and say, I'm going to actually nest my creates as well. So if you look at it, in this case, for an NSG network port, what we're saying is we're creating an NS port, and then we're creating a VLAN, and then we are creating an uplink connection as part of the whole feature. So our standard templates have been designed in such a way where it actually captures a feature rather than a specific object. So I was talking about the examples that we actually provide with our templates currently. So if you look at the templates that we define, right? So in the example section, all these examples are actually part of the container as well. So when you run a setup of the container and provide a mount point, these examples are copied onto the mount point of the host system. So you can actually go look at them and do things like that. So as you can see, our examples are all prefixed by a group that they're actually supporting. So anything that just does with administration of a VSD are all prefixed by admin underbar. So if you're looking at advanced routing, everything that is required by the advanced routing is actually prefixed by advanced routing. Similarly, DC infra, or and then network port, network bridges, and then security as well. So VNS AAR, VNS infra, VNS NSG. So these are all the different types of examples that we have currently listed in our examples directory, where people can look at and say, oh, I'm trying to create a bidirectional security policy. What are all the things that I'm going to need? So you can just look at that and it'll actually figure out what you need at that point, or all the templates that you require.
So these are the examples of user data, right? These are not templates.
Correct. These are all examples of user data.
So can we go back up to the top of the list and look at maybe compare two of the enterprise, like the admin enterprise default and admin enterprise options or something? Let's just, I just want to show the difference, right? Okay. So these are examples.
I can actually open up the enterprise. Let me open up the enterprise template first. That way we can talk about it. So the enterprise template, so the minimum required value is just the enterprise name. Everything else in here is optional because they're all defaulted by the VSD to a certain value. So when you actually do that, right? So when you're creating an enterprise and you just want to use the defaults that are already part of the VSD, all you just need to provide is the enterprise name. So this says, this user data tells us that you're trying to create an enterprise, and the values that you're trying to set are the enterprise name, which is a simple enterprise. When you run the MetroAE config with this particular user data, it's going to go ahead and create a simple enterprise with the defaults for the enterprise. So if you're trying to actually go ahead and say, hey, I want to set values on it, then you go about doing it this way. So you're going to say you're creating an enterprise template, and the enterprise name is this, and these are all the values that are currently supported on enterprise. So you can go ahead and change them to whatever you want rather than the defaults. So you can go about doing this. There are more ways to actually do it where if an enterprise actually, if two enterprises or two objects share the same values, then you can go about creating a group, something like this, and then leverage the group as part of the stuff when you create it. So what this does is these are all the values that are inherited by these two enterprises here. So because it's actually a children structure, like a tree structure, everything that the parent actually has are all directly inherited by the children. So all the first enterprise and the second enterprise will have the same attributes. Okay, going back to the presentation. So how to find out more? As Sanket already spoke about in the previous slides, you can try to go to this website, which contains information on Metro and Metro config, or you can get the repo and get the container out of it and then install MetroAE config and play with it. If there are any questions, you can always reach us out at devops@novagenetworks.net. And this is the link for our YouTube videos where every webinar that we do or anything that we think is something that's going to be helpful for the end user, we try to make a video of it and post it up there so people can look at it and understand or always go back and figure things out. Okay, questions?
Yes, I'm just wondering what we demonstrated. As I see, you have some trying to understand the background you are doing to make this work. And I see that you have some mix of the Jinja. So can we apply any Jinja manipulations within this?
Yes, that's a very good question. Actually, I want to show you something else as well. So anything that's supported by Jinja is supported by templates directly. So we don't have to do anything. So, and one of the things that I forgot to mention is when you create these custom templates, no code has to be changed in the config engine. So as some of you already know, our config engine supports user data in the form of Excel sheets and YAML files. So when you actually are trying to use Excel sheets, even with your custom templates, we should work fine. So you can create an Excel sheet based on your custom template, select values, do all the validation that we do for the standard templates. Everything is going to work right out of the box, and no code change has to be done for it as well. For the other question that I want to actually show you a different template. So let's look at DC Gateway Vlan. The reason I'm bringing up the DC Gateway Vlan template is because this actually does some customizations and Jinja magic inside it. So as you can see, the attribute for the VLAN can support any of these Jinja types, right? So it can actually say 1, 2, it's a list, right? So it can actually say it can be a range, or it can be a VLAN value list that you want in there. What we do as part of the code when we create it is when we are creating a VLAN object here, we're going to take the access VLAN values and we're going to strip and replace and do a bunch of Jinja magic here to build a list of VLANs in here. So in case if you are actually saying 4 to 10, right? So we're going to actually say create VLAN 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's the range that we're going to create for VLAN. So we actually do Jinja magic here as well. So any Jinja variables that you can do, we support it as part of the templates. So any of the Jinja 2 stuff, right? Any filters that Jinja supports, we support it. So you can go crazy with your templates and actually create any number of loops, or you can actually make it fancy as much as you want. Everything should just work. Does that answer the question?
Okay, yeah. Just see on that, and to me it's looked like quite let's say mix of the different things, but okay. And as I understand, when you demonstrated this selecting objects, creating objects, so setting some values, right? So that is parent-child relationship. So if we have a port, a plan, so that's absolutely, if we have nested actions or like create object, delete object, or whatever. So we following parent relationships specified by the API, right? So and
yes.
for the objects, okay. Because I saw this, you also specified for the enterprise, I think groups, right? You can go back to a second admin enterprise groups YAML, the previous one. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I see the group enterprises. Yeah, I see the template. So enterprise is actually selecting specification, but I don't see any kind of any action here, right? So that's
so this is the one that I'm showing you currently is user data. It is not template.
Data. Okay, and how are we importing this data? Using this data in the templates?
So what actually happens is the user data is also YAML format, right? So when you actually say, when you define this template key here, what this says is, this is for this particular enterprise, right? So this is the template name that you provide. So this has to match with what the template name says. So if you look at the template for the enterprise, the first thing that we define is the name. So this name is what gets tied in with the user data. So if you're looking at the NSG network port, for example, right? So if you look at the name of it, it says NSG network port. So if you're actually opening up user data for network ports here, it's got to match with this name here. The name of that template has to match the name of the template that you define in here.
So basically, you were saying by that, if you go back to the enterprise group, by that data, you're actually saying to apply this enterprise template to that these values and use the enterprise templates, right?
Correct,
so,
exactly. So the way we figure it out is with the template name that you define here. So with this, we actually try to figure out what the template that you're trying to set values for. So this name has to be unique in the system. This name has to be unique for a particular version of the Vsd. So for example, one thing that we encountered when we are doing templates is we actually have enterprise, which is different for version 6 and version 5. So we actually created 2 different versions of the enterprise template. So there's this version 502, which actually says it starts at 502 version of the system. And when you look at this, this is actually for 6. The software version it supports is minimum version is 6. The reason we had to do that because the forwarding classes changed on us from version 502 to version 6. So even though, so if you look at it, right, so the forwarding classes are a type of choice here. And when you go about setting them, you just pass in forwarding classes like this, right? So you just pass in a list to it. But when we worked with version 6 of the enterprise profile, the forwarding classes are a different object now. So we had to go create a different object here. So we have to create a child forwarding class object and then pass an attribute to it. So this name has to be unique for a version. So if you're doing 502, the system automatically recognizes that the VSD is actually a 502 version or a 5 train, and it actually says, I'm going to end up using this template. And then it says, that's based on the software version that you define here. So anything above 502 will actually use this. Once it gets to 6 train, it actually says, oh, I have a template for 6, so I'm not going to use this. So this software version here that is highlighted is the minimum software version that a template supports. So if there is a version that hasn't changed in the major releases or minor releases, then the software version is what the software version is. It's 502, which should work for 6.0 as well as 20.10. So for example, if you look at the DC Gateway here, this hasn't changed between major releases. So the minimum version is 522. So anything the VSD version that's above 522 will support it going forward. So even 20.10, the DC Gateway is the same.
I think it's important to note that the engine takes care of all this for you, so you don't have to worry about this. The engine queries the VSD to determine the version that it's running. It then loads in the proper set of Vsd API specifications, and it loads in the complete set of templates, and it selects the proper version of the template based on the specs it found and based on the version on the Vsd. So all of this takes place seamlessly under the covers for you.
We are referring to the one template name, but actually the actual choice of the necessary attributes is done automatically, I guess.
Yeah, I'm talking about the difference between selecting enterprise.yaml or enterprise_v502.yaml. That takes place automatically under the covers for you. You don't have to worry.
In respect to the version specified in the template, right?
Yes. Yes. So it actually queries the VSD for the VSD version that you're applying the config against. If the VSD version says 6.0, then the 502 template will not get applied to it, because there is already a enterprise template which actually says the minimum supported version is 6. We always take the greater minimum supported version against the VSD version. So if your VSD version starts at 6, we are going to actually say anything. So if you have a template that starts at 6 as well, so that's the template that we choose. If there is no version that says, hey, there isn't a version for 6, then we actually go to the next minimum version, which is 502. So we pick that.
Okay, so if it's like okay, let's imagine we have 6.1.10 and we have 6.07, right? So if we have no template for 6.1.10, we are automatically choosing the template for 6.07, for example, if 6.07 exists, right? Or we are choosing the template for 6.0.00. Just trying to understand the logic of that.
Okay, so the template version, so the way it works is it actually chooses the minimum greatest version, right? So let's take the example of Enterprise 502 and the enterprise.yaml that I'm showing you here. So if you are actually at, so when you have two different versions, which is 502 and 6.0.0, right? So any VSD that comes back with its version which is greater than 6.0, we are going to actually choose the template with software version 6.0. In the example that you're talking, right? So if we don't actually version our templates based on every version of VSD that comes out, we version our templates only when required or when there are changes that need to be supported based on the VSD spec. So as I was saying, the enterprise for 6.0, the forwarding class is changed to a different object underneath it rather than list. So if you look at the 502 enterprise and look at forwarding classes that get defined here, so the forwarding classes here is just nothing but a list which says allowed forwarding classes is the variable name. But when we talk about the enterprise here, in the 6.0 train, it's actually a forwarding classes object. So there's a fundamental difference between how the Vsd expects the 5 forwarding classes to be present when compared to the 6.0 train, right? So when the Vsd says if its version is greater than 6.0, we're going to actually pick the enterprise class that's minimum software version, which is 6. So for any VSD that's, so that the VSD version is 607, 610, or 20.10, we're going to actually choose the template, which is 6, because that's the minimum, that's the maximum supported version. Minimum supported version is what I should say. Right? So if anything between 5 and 6 actually is the VSD version, then we go to 502 because, so for example, if it's a 541 VSD, even though there is a 6.0 template for it, we are not going to choose the 6.0 because that's not the maximum version, minimum version supported, right? So it's the 502 is going to be the template that we choose. It's all very relative to what the VSD version is.
Yeah, so what I want to suggest is that for folks who want an even deeper dive, send us an email, and we'll go ahead and set up another session for people who really want to go into the nitty-gritty details, and we're happy to train and teach you to do all this on your own, because it helps you to be successful if you can do that. But we are running very close to the end of the hour. Are there other questions that we can answer really quickly?
Yeah, I actually have a question, I think, and that's very relevant to one of the projects that we have is about Excel functionality. So what we can export, in what form we can export, and when you do, let's say, that MetroAE command to export this particular template, are we limited to that particular template, or can we expand maybe number of fields? And same actually applies to so can we export, for example, existing functionality, not just, of course, for holding system Babcocks by no means, but maybe just for documentation, for example. Do we have this functionality, and what are the limitations?
So, so the Excel files that get exported where you can provide inputs are actually directly dependent on the template that you're trying to export, right? So as I was saying before, so if I go into the NSG network port, right, so I added this new value called mode, which is for the uplink connection, right? So when you do an export, or when you generate the Excel sheet for this, it's going to put the mode in there now. The new file will have the mode in there. So if you're trying to actually add more attributes to the Excel sheets, they have to be first defined in the template. If they're not defined in the template, then when we parse the Excel, we are not going to know about those attributes that are added recently.
Okay. And can we export the, let's say, Excel template, including the actual values that are present on the system?
So we actually have a different kind of tool for that, which is still in prototype stages. We don't dump the existing VSD configuration out. But we actually have a way for us to do it. It's in still prototype stages. We're still trying to gather more requirements and see how we can handle most of the use cases in there. If you're interested, we can talk about this separately.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Just one more maybe question. So for example, if you're re-importing in Excel, again, spreadsheet into the VSD with all the fields filled, and if, let's say, we delete one or more columns that are empty, would the system accept that, or would there be some perhaps errors generated, or?
So you're talking about removing the columns that are already.
Yeah. Maybe for example, we have Excel spreadsheet that's like 25 columns, and we need just 4 or 5, right? Could we just delete them on Excel and re-import it to the system? Just out of interest, what would happen?
It's a good question. I have not tried it, but I can try and let you know, because the way we have defined Excel is the required fields are all, the column is actually colored in yellow. So those are the fields that we are going to require. if I understand the code correctly, I think we should work fine if you delete it, but I want to try it out before I commit to anything. I can try it out and send you an answer.
But you're saying if we want to add, I think that's more relevant question. If we want to add some columns, for example, if we target, let's say just maybe L3 domain something, the existing template that we have in standard templates folder, if we target that and we ask the Metro system to generate an Excel template for us, it generates actually a template just with 3 columns. So if we want to expand that list of columns, we need actually to modify that standard template and add additional variables there, right?
Correct, exactly.
Okay.
So let me just do a quick demo of this, right? So for this L3 domain, I have actually modified the standard template to add the stretched object into it, right? So if I go back into my console here and then say Metroid config. So I'm generating an Excel sheet with this command right now. So I'm saying MetroAE Config Excel, and then the template name that I'm trying to generate, and the template path. So it's created this Excel sheet now for me. So if I go back and so if I open the recently generated one, see now the attribute is added. The column is there now. The stretched column is added to the Excel sheet. So you can actually use this. Okay. And when you add values, we're going to parse the values fine as well. So you don't have to worry about that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, folks. Well, we've gone past the end of the hour. I think it's time for us to end here. It's really cool that we have interest in this tool. That's one of the things that we find very helpful, is to know that you're interested in learning more information. It's pretty clear that we'll need to have a follow-up session that goes a little bit deeper in terms of information that we provide. So we're going to set that up. If you're interested, go ahead and send us mail to let us know that you should be included on the list. So thank you very much. Y'all take care.